So in this video, we were discussing how to produce. So it is not new concept for us how to produce. In the previous chapter, when we look at how to produce, we emphasize the factor of the production. So the factors of production is the resource input used to produce goods and services. So we usually have four factors: labor, land, capital, and entrepreneurship. And if you forget about what are they, please refresh your memory by visiting that videos from the previous chapter. So here we should using those concepts to help us to understand how the American produces. So how a country produces depends on what resource input are available. So key among the resource input is capital. So the capital here is a little bit different from the capital we defined in the previous chapter. So if you remember in the previous chapter, the labor including the skill, but here we're using another branch of the economic theory to define the capital. So generally speaking, we have two different kinds of capitals: human capital and physical capital. So for the human capital, it's the knowledge and the skill possessed by the workforce. So for instance, just like you, the reason you come to college is try to gain your human capital. So the more human capital you have means you have better value on the job market and you potentially will have more incomes. And so that is the human capital. And for the physical capital, it's different from human capital. It is mainly about the physical item you have, such as the facilities, tools, equipment, and the infrastructure available to the workforce. So you need physical capital as investment for your future, for the product development and production. So those are the physical capitals. So generally speaking, in the poorest country, fewer than half ever attend high school. As a result, many are unable to read a book or even write their own names. Without the functional literacy, such workers are doomed to low productivity jobs. And oppositely, the high output of US actually is explained not only by the wealth of resources, but by their quality as well. The high productivity of the US economy results from using highly educated workers in capital-intensive production process. So in the US, we have the capital-intensive economy, and in the poorest country, it's go oppositely. So since I mentioned about the physical and capital intensive, and for the US, you have to understand we are invest heavily in the human capital, and we have accumulated a massive amount of this physical capital as well. And the US has a high productivity economy resulting in using highly educated workers with a highly technical equipment in the capital-intensive production process. In the US, households are able to consume so much because American workers produce so much. So now we have to distinguish capital and the labor intensive. Capital and the labor intensive. And so the exceptional productivity of the American worker is due to the large part to an advance of the capital. So an American production tend to be capital intensive, while many other nations tend to use labor intensive. So what's the definition for capital intensive? So the capital intensive is a production process that use a high ratio of the capital to labor input. So we call it capital intensive. So why some countries have capital intensive? Because their capital is abundant and they're relatively low cost, but their labor is costly, such as US. So in the US, we have, so compared with the other countries, we have more talented people, we have more physical capitals, and when we production, we have found we have more talented people involved and more equipment involved, and the less unskilled labor involved. So that's why the labor kind of expensive, costly, but the capital is very abundant, and compared with the labor, they are low cost. So that's the reason to support our US have to develop a capital intensive business, such as Boeing, and we do have small clothes manufacturing, but compared with other countries, before was China, now it's Vietnam, we really don't see we have the comparative advantage in the labor cost. So the opposite case will be the labor intensive. So the definition for labor intensive is the production process that uses a higher ratio of the labor to capital inputs. So in that scenario, that country's capital is unavailable or very expensive, and also the labor is so cheap. Again, the opposite case, such as Vietnam, Thailand, the old China, so they all consider as labor-intensive economy. So their labor is relatively cheaper than the capital. So this is about the different type of the the capital stock. So other thing we need to discuss in this this part, American How to Produce, we have to mention about the other factors which will affect how to produce. So the first thing we need to mention is about the technology advance. So the technology advance will also help to answer the question how to produce. So the technology advance will allow them to find a new and a better way to produce products. And also when technology advances, an economy can produce more output with existing resources. So you can think about when we just start to invent the smartphone, how expensive they are, how limited quantity we have. But now if you talk about smartphone, and you look at how many people have smartphone, and you actually feel for people who don't have smartphone, they look odd. So they're so popular. Everything is thankful to the technology advances. So when we have technology advances, usually we will see the economic growth. So which means the production possibility curve will shift outward. And other factors, such as factor mobility, so that is the continuing ability to produce the goods and services that consumer demand. Also depends on our ability in relocating resource from other industry to another. So many government agents nowadays actually when they analyzing the government try to get the general report, instead of hiring the internal analysis, they usually subcontract with some private firm and to help them to do the data analysis. So that kind of action is considered as the factor mobility. So the factor mobility also will help how to produce answer and make the production more productive. And another factor will affect how to produce is outsourcing and trade. So technological advance permit global resource use. Advances in telecommunications has facilitated this. Although some U.S. workers suffer job losses in this process, productivity and the total output increase U.S. workers pursue their comparative advantage. So those are the issues related to how to produce. So next we will look at during this whole question how to produce, what should be the role for government. So obviously we mentioned in the chapter 1, we are not government directive market, but we do need government to do some regulation. So it's very important for everybody to understand what is government should do and what is government shouldn't do. So if we will be able to understand the whole process, and we will be able to rationally follow government's policy. So for the role of the government, we must also take a heed of the role of the government plays in choosing how a nation's goods and services are produced. The Heritage Foundation has documented a positive relationship between degree of economy, freedom, and economic growth. So what does that mean? So that means if we have a relative freedom economy, we are more likely to have successful economy. So in another way, we don't want the government to fully control the market. We still want the market to take part of the power to run it by themselves. So then come back to the question. Then what is the role for the government? So government also, although government cannot fully control the market, they are very important in terms of the success of the market. So here are the possible role for the government. So first, government will provide a legal framework. So one of the most basic functions of the government is to establish and enforce the rule of the game, such as EPA, USDA. So they are all agents set up very strict law to regulate agriculture, construction, etc. And also the government gives a legitimacy to contracts by establishing the rules for such parts and by enforcing them provisions. By establishing the ownership right, contract right, and other rules of the game, so the government lays the foundation for market transaction. So the basic job for here is government try to the market run healthily without any violation of other participants' interest. So the second role is to protect the environment for the government. So the legal contract system is designed to protect the interests of a buyer and the seller who wish to do business. What if the business they contract for harm third party? So we will call it the externality. So in the absence of government intervention, such side effect would be common. To reduce external costs of production, the government limits air, water, and noise pollution and regulate environment usage. So this is the second job for the government. The third possible role for the government is try to protect consumer. Consumer is considered the weak group when we are talking about the relationship between government, the business, and consumer. The government also uses its power to protect the interests of the consumers. One way to do this is to prevent individual business firms from becoming too powerful. If they become too powerful and they are the only ones serving on the market, we call it a monopoly. So if the firm identifies the monopoly and the entire market is supplying a particular goods or services, so the protect the consumers from monopoly exploitation, the government try to prevent individual farmers from dominating specific markets. The government also regulates the safety of the product. And the fourth role government can play is protect labor. So the government also regulates how labor resources are used in production process. So in many poor nations, children are forced to start work at a very early age. They do not get the chance to go to school or to stay healthy. In the U.S., child labor law and compulsory schooling prevent minor children from being exploited. And government regulation also set a standard for workplace safety, minimum wage, fringe benefit, and the overtime provision. So in next video, and we actually were discussing for whom American produces.